Hello and welcome to this series on navigating the never normal. Today we are focusing on accelerating digital transformation to unlock enterprise value. The larger question is, as we've gone through COVID-19 and in countries like India where the number of cases are still rising, some fundamental questions come up. As organizations, there are internal questions, there are internal issues, internal challenges that have been posed to us because of the very nature of organizations distributed as they are, particularly for larger organizations. And then there are the external challenges to do with consumers, consumer facing, in some cases when if you're trying to recruit talent or talent is coming in. And there are very, very unusual situations which are obviously all for the first time that India Inc. is seeing. So how does India Inc. navigate this never normal by keeping in mind the new normal behaviors that we are seeing both from the consumer side as well as within organizations, number one. Number two, what are the key lessons that we've learned which are perhaps good in a way which in some ways has revealed the resilience of organizations to cope with such dramatic shocks and changes? So to discuss that, I'm joined by Sunil KANT Munjal, a business promoter, institution builder, social entrepreneur and an angel investor, and also the chairman of Hero Enterprise, overseeing several businesses ranging from investments in many other companies to his insurance broking, realty, Hero Steels and Hero Mine. I'm also joined in this conversation by someone who is a keen student of the Indian economy, apart from heading Accenture's business in India. Piyush Singh has been in financial services for a while, also worked in a bank in England and now here. And he has some interesting thoughts on migration, the migrant crisis, how he sees migrants as entrepreneurs, apart from the challenges that everyone sees on how do you connect with consumers, how do you retain them, and how do you build enterprises at a time when in some ways there is overcapacity. So thank you both for joining me. Mr. Munjal, let me go with you first. So broadly, if you look back at the last few months and in the multiple hats that you wear, what are your thoughts and what are your key learnings?
So one thing is clear, this current situation does not impact companies or business alone. It impacts us at multiple levels, as individuals, as families, as businesses, as nations, and society at large. And these are not divorced from each other. So to the point you were making, the internal and external actually has literally a meaning across all of this entire spectrum. So the companies themselves have actually, I have to say, done pretty well. Many companies turned around very smartly. First, there was the extreme shock when this came in, because most people had no clue what to do. And rightfully so, I guess, because this was completely new. Nobody had any knowledge of this, including governments. But they reacted and responded quite quickly. First, to pure crisis, helping people, building safety, providing support to the disadvantaged, migrants, etc. And then jumping in to look at how, in fact, many of us, I myself was quite deeply involved in looking at how policy can be designed, how central government, state governments should function, how the recording should be done of capacity of hospitals, ICU beds, protective gear, ventilators. We set up an alliance of auto companies, auto component companies, and medical device companies. So a bunch of things actually started off. So first, I thought that was very entrepreneurial, and that was very patriotic in a way when people pulled in together and said, I'll do something which goes beyond myself. That was very encouraging. What was a bit confusing was the number of administrative orders that came in quick succession, each one countering the other. That caused some confusion. And again, on hindsight, we all get smart, but I guess it was because none of us knew what we were facing. Today, we are, of course, smarter. We are better informed, and we've now figured out that we have to learn to live with this that you're calling never normal.
Would you say that across your investments, the companies that are part of the Hero Enterprise, you had roughly the same kind of experience and the same kind of...
Oh, no, not at all. It was quite different. Both in geographical areas, it was different. In the businesses that we are in, it was different. So the steel business, for example, just shut down because all the customers were shut down too, besides the restriction on movement. But the training business got an interesting boost because many people said, all my team is sitting at home. Can you guys take an assignment and train them, either upskill them in whatever is their chosen area or build another capability in our team? And many people came voluntarily, individually, but lots of this came from companies. So it was quite different for each sector.
Piyush, you have some thoughts about how companies have looked at this and how they need to look at it, as particularly those who are pegged or connected to consumers and loyal consumers. Tell us how you've been seeing this from your vantage point.
The first point, I totally agree with you. This is, unfortunate and never normal. And we don't know what the normal is going to be for a period yet. So I agree with Mr. Munjal's point about, the deal that I think most organizations have done a commendable job of dealing with a level of uncertainty that is unprecedented. There are no data points around which to deal with. But what has happened, because you specifically asked me about the consumer, is that, we were already living in a world where we were all projecting a level of digital adoption of consumption of both goods and services, over at a level of pace that was forecasted. What this has done is accelerated that about tenfold in the last few months. And I'm not the only person who is now saying that. A lot of people have said, only question is whether it is 10x or it is 50x that curve has gone up, right? So what that means is that, we are now in a possibly an irreversible position of that acceleration of consumption of all goods and services and digital interaction with your customer that will need to happen. So, that's again means that a fundamental revisit of operating models of the way organizations are designed to deal with customers, right? And this is, affecting every possible industry, right? So this is not just, consumer industry or e-commerce. It is affecting every possible industry. We're working, for example, in China with a number of organizations who are fundamentally revisiting the distribution supply chain or the distribution end of automobile, right? Because they just do not believe there will be footfall at dealerships on one hand. We're working with life sciences organizations who are having to revisit how will they start to have interaction with medical health professionals, because that's, no medical health professional is willing to increase their risk of exposure by meeting possible distribution and sales professionals from life sciences organizations, right? So on one hand, you've got a fundamental rebuild of the way you interact and with your consumer. On the other hand, as Mr. Munjal mentioned, you have to now plan for a massively elastic cost base, because you have to face up to the fact that there are scenarios which will require you to go all the way down to zero production, all the way down to zero supply, right? So the elasticity in cost base, which was always, no businessman ever planned for beyond a certain percentages, as now has to go all the way down to zero and back up, right? So that elasticity of cost base will require a fundamental revisit of your entire organization's internal supply model and your operating model, right? Now,
right.
The thing that I have said before, which I'll say again, is that those organizations who are coming out of this in a reasonably okay position must not make the folly of looking at cost from a perspective of, by stealth, which is, I must shut down discretionary spend. They must look at how to invest in terms of reinventing the internal supply chain so that they can end up with an elastic cost base. Because if they don't do that, they will build massive inefficiencies in the internal supply chain when they just shut down certain discretionary costs.
I'd like two things to what Piyush said. This is what he's saying is wonderfully verbalizing what's going on in business. Two other things are happening at the same time. One is the decision-making curve has got flattened.
Yeah.
Companies are saying, let people lower down what you consider the hierarchy in the system, make decisions. So you don't actually necessarily need to get too many people together, too many meetings, too much burden. So that actually is adding tremendously to the efficiency. Added to that, this work from anywhere model. So when you combine these three things, I think this is a magical opportunity here. So as I was telling you before we started, one is we can all crib about the situation. Two is look at the positive side of the tremendous leap forward that we can make in efficiency, productivity, outputs, and innovation.
Right. So, Mr. Munjal, so, you mentioned a little earlier, this Hero Enterprise study, which talks about, the three buckets of companies, those who benefit, those who are beaten and will recover, and those, the last category, which who will be badly hit and will not fully recover. Are these also companies, to pick up on Piyush's point, who are not able to provide or create the right elasticity in cost, or is it to do more fundamentally with their businesses themselves?
So it's a bit of both. One is some sectors will get impacted. Second is to do with human behavior. Part of behavior that we display at work and otherwise, I think, has changed forever. But some of it is elastic and will spring right back. So the smart companies are trying to figure out what falls in which bucket. And therefore, the business that I'm in, how do I make it more sustainable for the future? How do I ensure that I'm in that category? If I have got negatively impacted today, I'm in that category which will spring right back up. And the smarter companies are doing three things. One is massive induction of technology in all aspects of the business. And I mean literally all. Okay. And I'm also talking of the most traditional conservative businesses are also looking at induction of technology. Second is the cost base itself is being questioned. And not in terms of 5 or 10% less than last year, but questioning de novo the very logic of a number of activities that we follow in our companies to ask, is this even necessary? And to the point I was making earlier, if you're going to make decisions differently, you can certainly have a different cost base.
And can you give us some illustrations of that, Mr. Munjal?
Yeah, so we've done it ourselves. Let me give you a non-business example of what we did. Because we are doing this in companies all the time. So I just want to expand this to show you how it's going across life in many, many ways. We have a foundation called the Serendipity Arts Foundation, which runs one of the largest arts festivals in the world. It's a multidisciplinary art festival, which we do every December in Goa. Now, because we are not going to be able to do this, so we did a virtual one in April. We had 1 million visitors in 6 days. 1 million visitors in 6 days from around the world. And we're going to do another one now. So what I'm talking about is activities which would never have looked at technology, by the way. So of course, companies are reorienting their processes, the decision-making, their supply chains, and the distribution on both ends, starting from the very concept and design of product and services. And it's Piyush is right, it's for both. It's not just for a product design, it's also for a service and a process design. That's being called into question de novo. And I think it's fantastic, by the way. And one of the biggest hurdles that we have spoken about in recent times is this massive migration and job losses. And if you do ask that question later on, I'll tell you why I think it's an even bigger opportunity than technology for India.
Right. So, and I'm going to ask that question, but let me ask that first to Piyush, because I know he's also mentioned this as a thought. Go ahead, Piyush.
Yeah, look, I mean, I have mentioned this in other forums, which is, in my view, it's a complex problem. I mean, not straightforward, but the migration does give an opportunity. And the opportunity sits with the fact that if you look at the migrant that has gone from urban to rural today, it has gone away with a number of fundamental value adds to the rural economy. Number one, it has tasted a level of technology-driven innovation that has just been rampant in urban India, whether it is for digital consumption, whether it is for payment, whether it is so that is one thing it has experienced. Number two, it has experienced that the whole migrant population experienced organized financial services. Right, so it is not afraid. I mean, I always go back to that example when I talk to a number of banking institutions, they know that a deep rural population sees the bank as a bit of a scary place. But this urban migrant does not. They know that they are a service provider to me. And number three, he or she came to urban India chasing a dream. I mean, they are no different to a affluent Delhi boy and girl wanting to go to the US chasing a dream, right? It's exactly the same proportionalities. So when they come back, it's not that different to the dot-com bubble bust when a lot of Indian techies came back home, right? And then said, okay, let me try and make something out of this. But I think that will only work, to go back to Mr. Munjal's earlier point, provided there's clarity of policy making across various institutions. And if we can unleash a level of financial backing, organized financial backing and investment for this community to say, go on. Try your hand at entrepreneurship. Build a new innovative services and products that are good for the rural economy, right? That are not designed for. A few points that Mr. Munjal made, right? The flat decision making. Yeah, this is exactly what we want. We don't want somebody sitting in Mumbai with designing a rural product. Let this person who's gone there and understands that, design new rural products and services. So I do think there is an opportunity there. I do worry that our focus will be far too much on, let's try and bring this person back into urban, and that will never, because there's a lot of money that the Indian economy has to spend at decongesting its urban clusters. Let's face it, most of our urban clusters are suffering huge amount of decay because of migration. And that pot of money, again, can be an investment that can be redirected to resettling this migrant labor in an enterprising fashion in its home, if we can do that. So that's a sunken capital that we have to spend anyway on the economy and its health. So again, there are pockets of money to be unleashed, there's pockets of enterprise to be unleashed, and there's pockets of innovation to be unleashed. Mr. Munjal, you had something on your mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Piyush on this, but I'd go a step beyond. I think there are three opportunities here. One is to rapidly grow a rural economy by industrializing and using these folks who've gone back. We say unskilled labor. These are not unskilled people, by the way. They worked in companies 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Of course, they have skills. They have lots of skills. We train them. That's what all of us do in our companies. We train our people. So they're used to working on machines, mechanical stuff, electronic stuff, to the point Piyush made, dealing with digital services. Allow them to get into the economy, to build the rural economy, and force the urban industrial clusters to automate, to use more machines, to use more machine learning, automation, robotics. So you can actually upgrade the entire economy in India. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. The crowding to some extent will go down, but don't look at it as a disadvantage. Supplement it with equipment, with technology, which is available all over the world. Because don't forget, you have to compete with the world today, no matter whether you are in Delhi or in Gorakhpur or in Lucknow or in Ahmedabad, you have to compete with a product made in China or in France or in the US. So this is one way for us to take a big quantum leap forward. If we set our mind to it, we are at a cusp of big dramatic change in India, with the world looking unkindly at China. It's not an automatic shift to India. Please remember that. We have to make it work. It will not happen by itself. In the first flush, which started 2 years ago, most companies went to Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, even Brazil. Very little came to India. Bangladesh got a big advantage. We did not. So we have to go and grab it. So for the first time now, India has made a list of 1,400 companies around the world who have the potential to either come in and invest in India, who are currently invested in China, or use India as a part of their value chain. So it is a unique opportunity for us. And here is the home of how it can actually be done, is build the rural economy and upgrade the urban economy at the same time.
Mr. Munjal, what's your sense? I mean, the migration crisis was at its peak in the month of April and to some extent May. It eased off. A lot of people started coming back because many people, including their past employers, were enticing them back, particularly in construction, which in any case is a large employer of migrant labor. So do you feel things have panned out in this manner? Is it likely to continue in a way that we will see this new rebalanced portfolio, so to speak, of skills?
So I think about 30 to 40% have already come back. There's another 25 to 30% who will come back by after Diwali, early January sometime. But there's about 30% who will never come back. Their families will not let them come back. They're saying, I'm back home. I can do a job here. I can do something here. That is the energy we need to use. So, because don't forget, digital services are reaching the rural areas now in India, in many, many parts of India. You open 380 million new bank accounts. You have 700 million people with smartphones. So that is a staggering opportunity, actually. All we have to do is make sure we keep pushing this initiative in the right direction. We don't get overexcited by expecting it to happen tomorrow, and we don't give up because it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Right. So, Piyush, I mean, one of your key portfolios is financial inclusion, which in turn can drive and sustain many of these efforts, and essentially keep the momentum going. What's your sense? How is it likely to pan out, and what will be the role of financial inclusion in building this strong base of a sort of a new economy base?
Yeah, look, as I've said, I mean, organized financial incentives where you can put this into the incentive lending structure of financial institutions, because they are, it's a fantastic process framework that the RBI and the Finance Ministry have got, which is to incentivize priority lending. Make this part of the priority lending. Put this into the priority lending part of the priority lending quota, and say, if you can disburse new MSME loan in the rural segments, and the great thing is, again, in terms of policy framework, our segmentation of exact rural geographic locations is quite specific. So again, incentivizing it by that, knowing it, and we know today, just by, if you almost track where the mobile signals went, where people have ended up in their homes, right? And to Mr. Munjal's point, he's right that, there will be a 30-odd% that will never come back. But, like in case of managing attrition in every organized pyramid, what you don't want is only the ones that find themselves with least skills don't end up behind, right? You want the ones who are more enterprising to have the incentive to be staying back, right? Because they will then mobilize, every enterprising fellow will mobilize 6 others, right? So to do that. So I do think, for me, the organized financial sector is a big tool. Priority segment lending is a big policy framework that can be used to incentivize lending for pushing MSME activity in the rural sector, during this period, and and doing that and tapping that before the brighter part of that community starts to come back looking for work. Because the other thing, socially, if you start to track the spread of the infection data, remember, it is now spreading suburban. So there is more of a panic to get out right now, right? And therefore, you don't want that reverse migration to happen in the mode of panic. You want it to happen in an organized fashion.
Right. Mr. Munjal, in this never normal, is there a place for a compassionate organization? And I'll give you the 2 reasons I'm asking this. One is, we've talked about the need for more elastic cost bases and essentially far more nimble and lean and mean organizations. On the other hand, you also have a consumer to whom you need to be compassionate, at least as a brand, particularly if you're a product or a service company that has an intimate connect. So how are you seeing these situations, and how do you see it evolving?
So first, it's not an oxymoron, by the way. In fact, I think it's essential for companies to become more humane. One of the things, the fallouts of this, people spending time at home and figuring out that everybody's got a similar difficulties, people have become a little bit more considerate. So firms actually essentially need to understand and be sympathetic to their entire value chain, the employees within the companies, their suppliers, as also their distribution system. And at the end of it, the most important and the critical one in the business is the customer. So if you're not actually fully appreciating their situation, their complexity, and their difficulty, your business will only be successful for a short term. So I think being a more humane organization is a wake-up call for some, and those who already were, by the way, are benefiting very quickly. If you look at what's happening, there are some companies reporting 100 or 120% of the pre-COVID level already. Of course, it's in certain segments of the market, not across the board, because parts of the economy are still hurting and suffering quite badly. So, for example, we asked each one of our employees how we could help them. Not just them, their colleagues, their friends, their families as well, with their situation, both with health and also getting around. Initially, people were locked in. Some of them did not have, daily goods. So we started off a small campaign to help support people. We did this for outside others. And to help people. Our insurance company, as you know, we're a large distributor of insurance. We went out and started reaching people to get insurance to them digitally without having to meet with people. The same thing started with our real estate firm to demonstrate people a visit, a 3D visit, without actually getting them into a crowded place. So I think companies have become sensitive to this. Some have been forced to, but the smarter ones are doing it proactively. And the smartest ones are those which will hold on to this.
Right. Piyush, what's your sense about the personality of this never normal organization, or the organization in this never normal future?
There are 2 points. I think one is the compassion with, in a brand is a must have in every normal, right? If it is, therefore, in that compassion, you are partly hinting at contingent action. This is a contingent period. Now, of course, that means that you must step up and deliver during the contingent period. Go that extra mile, and that is a must. And those organizations that fail at that will have irreparable damage to their brand. So that's part A. But there's a part B, which I thought where you were weaving to, is to say, when I say elastic cost based, is that human substitution? And now, if you look at that, there's a number of things that have come out. If you look at the current period of contingent crisis, you realize that there is a shortage of skill in a number of areas where there is an acute need. Whether you look at, trained hospital staff, you look at possibly, medical testing staff. So we are not talking about a problem of, there is unemployment. There's a lack of, a correct alignment of skills and employable jobs, right? Or skills and employment. And therefore, it is important that we take away the incentive of employing people who are not willing, to put the extra effort of getting trained into mundane jobs by making sure that the technology does that, because that is the elasticity we need, right? On the other hand, rapidly skilling people to make sure that they are starting to fulfill the massive acute shortfalls that we have got here and globally. I mean, if you look at it, globally we have come across this phenomenon that there is massive shortages of skills where people are needed on one hand. On the other hand, yes, there is oversupply in areas that are largely substitutable, right? So it's an obvious reshaping of that supply chain that needs to happen, and should happen at the earliest. Another example, if you look at by that, the organizations that what I call the digitally native organizations, we kind of fall somewhere in that bucket, but then you've got obviously the more product development organizations which are more digitally native as well. Look at them. They are the ones who are doing as much possible their infusion of technology throughout their distribution, production, and supply chain. But they are the ones whose rate of employment of humans has gone up the fastest as well. So I don't think it's a question of substitution. It is a question of deploying skills and furthering skills, and getting them to work more efficiently along with technology. And that's the opportunity we have got, because this has only shown us that it's not that there's a problem of substitution, it's the problem of aligning the skills where they're needed, and getting those jobs to be done.
Right. Mr. Munjal, you've talked about, access to technology, deciding access to knowledge. And while this is a given now and everyone understands it, but I'm sure Not everyone is able to adopt and adapt at the speed and at they are supposed to or should be doing in order to either stay alive or actually maybe pull through this in a successful manner. What are your own experiences been?
Sure, I will respond to that, but let me add again one thing to what Piyush said. I'll tell you the formula that we have used for many decades in our company, not just today. There were three considerations for us where we would use a machine or a robot in a process instead of a human being. If a process is a health hazard, we have chosen always to use robots and machines in our companies, in our paint shops, plating shops, brazing shops, all of those places. And not today, this is from our bicycle days, even before we started the two-wheeler business, by the way. Hero Cycles used to have robots in its paint shops and its brazing shops 40 years ago. The second was processes which required extreme repetition and extreme accuracy. We would put machines. Because human beings tend to get tired, you can make a mistake, you can fall sick, so that's also becomes dangerous and impacts the product quality or the human or the individual. So those are places, and we had worked out formulae of cost of how to figure out this replacement of one for the other. And this I thought was a very sensible human thing to do. And some places we found we put a robot, and after a few months we had to take the robot off and put a person back. This is something else we used to keep doing, is constantly test where this margin or the line lies, and not be rigid with it, but be flexible and be realistic. But going to your question now, I think it's critical at this moment to understand that delivery of service is one thing, but quality of life itself will get impacted for those who have access to digital access and for those who do not or have limited access. If you simply look at a thing like education, okay, we are very deeply involved with education. We have 30,000 plus kids studying in our own family schools right now. Now we said we'll run classes, virtual classes from day one. Actually, we started within 3 days, we started virtual classes. But there were messages that some of the kids or their parents did not have a smart device. So what do? So you have to figure out an answer for them, whether they can use TV or radio, or some other people did something smart. They got together and said, let's build a device bank. All of us have devices that we bought earlier. And when we get a new one, we just kind of put it aside in a drawer, it's lying around somewhere, and it's not being used. And there are millions of them lying around. So I hope and wish somebody on a program like yours would actually propagate this to get them back and get them to people who really need them. But in business, we are seeing this all the time. And we have attempted from our side, by the way, to make a very quick turnaround. The big challenge first was getting all the devices, because we were not expecting people to work from home only on smartphones. So we had to physically get devices to some people. The second challenge was on security. One was data security, and two was ensuring that even if data is secured in the system, that at the end point, now you don't know if there's somebody else standing around and taking a picture of what I'm saying on the screen. So we've still not figured out the complete answers. There are some processes available right now. There are some artificial intelligence programs which get loaded onto the system. They're used for proctored exams, etc. But there's no foolproof system as yet. But the direction is clear. We have to move further in this direction. For our own sake, we cannot say that when the pandemic is over, whether it takes a year or a year and a half, that we will go back to the old system and no longer use technology for furthering our work or our process, our decision making or our meetings. This travel to, from Delhi to London for a 2-hour meeting and coming back, all of us have done it many times. But today you're seeing that it makes no sense to do that any longer. So we have to get smart about this, the opportunity given to us by this crisis.
Right. I'm going to come back to you for one last point, Mr. Munjal. Piyush, how are you seeing this? The new organization in its. So I think we've built a few blocks. We've talked about that it has to be compassionate, that it has to be elastic, including in cost. It has to now work with technology ever more than before. It has to perhaps work with a newer kind of employees or partners? What else? I mean, what am I missing here?
I keep taking us back to the contingent versus the beyond the contingent. See, if we're going through a phase where a lot of adrenaline and a lot of, organizational as well as nationalistic patriotism, or has forced people, not in a positive sense, has driven people rather than forced to carry through this crisis. But we will now have to go back to the drawing board to redraw those relationships. How do we ensure that we have redrawn the ways of working in the organization so that it can be done in a sustainable manner? So that people can, once the crisis and the adrenaline of the crisis management starts to come down, people know that they've got an organized way of working. So there is a period of redrawing that will come as the crisis subsides. So that's one thing. The second thing is, what this does teach us, this whole period is partly the point that Mr. Munjal made, which is, you'll have to have a greater sense of trust in your organizational hierarchy for decision making. Now, when you start to push decision making down, you start to put trust down. It is part of the building block, by the way, of new ways of working. And this all of that needs to come into this, right? In doing that, you also need to make sure that it ends up in faster decision making. Because that, if you push it down and then if the whole thing slows up, then you become, a bureaucracy, which is exactly the outcome you did not want. So I do think, it's a question of revisiting, and Mr. Munjal's made the point about revisiting a few times. Again, it is about revisiting your ways of working, redrawing it, from scratch, wherein, of course, technology will now play a far more pivotal role than it ever has. But make sure you don't do that by digitizing the analog world, right? So, it's like, that famous, because we're talking about students, that, that the story that we grew up, my children will never grow up with that, right? When you're copying the homework and there was a mosquito in the book, the guy said, okay, let me also smash a mosquito up because that's exactly what I must submit to my teacher. So in digitizing the whole, becoming a digital native operating in a digital native world, it is critical that we don't end up digitizing the analog world, because that's what we're doing now, right? I mean, today we are saying a meeting must occur by people being on video, and we are enabling video calling. Now that's not digital collaboration. Digital collaboration is very different to us still, trying to participate in a meeting through a video call. So my only request is, my view would be, yes, there is some real rethinking to be done, right? Which will be beyond the popular headlines of this many people will never come back to office, that much real estate will go away because people will shut down. Look, all of that, none of us know the answer to that yet. When we redraw it, we will have to relook at what are the collaboration spaces. Where will they exist? Will they exist in offices? Will they exist outside of offices? Will they be physical or not? Right? And then also redrawing the ways of working to be digitally native in collaboration and working together, not by digitizing analog world.
Right. And that's an interesting point, Piyush. But can I just ask you to give us an example? When you talk about the fear or your concern about digitizing the analog world, what is your biggest worry?
My worry there is it'll lead to a massive level of inefficiencies. If you digitize, when every time you digitize an analog world, it leads to inefficiency rather than adoption and engagement. So it will lead. So that's the bit that I worry about, right? And I can name you multiple examples of how Mr. Munjal will know this. When the first time we tried to do, organizations tried to do insurance policies on a digital way, they said, okay, let me publish the same terms and condition and let the person read that on a phone. I mean, it was nigh impossible, never going to happen, right? So the guy said, forget it, I'm not going to even touch this like that. Till you then change the whole model to say, okay, hold on a minute, this is not going to work. So it, as an anecdotal example, right? But so right. I would say, let's not do that, because that will lead to disengagement. It will lead to, people, getting disenchanted with the workplace rather than embracing that.
Right. Mr. Munjal, last word from you. In the beginning, you talked about the partnership, that this crisis unleashed. Piyush referred to it in a different way, and he says the adrenaline of crisis management, which of course begins to wean off over time. What's your sense when you look at this now as an entrepreneur, as a family of entrepreneurs who've been around for a very long time? What has this brought about? As speaking as an Indian entrepreneur, to pick up another term that you used about patriotism, what is this teaching us? What is it telling us about ourselves?
I think there are two or three things, and these are in some sense additions to what you said about organization. I think one of the things which is necessary is for us to show leadership by actioning things ourselves, by doing rather than only talking. And the second important one is communication. I think open, transparent, clear communication, especially in the middle of a crisis and going forward in the changed environment post the crisis, I think it's going to be critical and will segregate companies from outstanding companies. Because there are companies who do well for a spurt, but then there are those who do well quarter on quarter, year on year, decade on decade. And that's where you will see this distinction amongst by the leaders genuinely leading from the front and also allowing their teams to take credit rather than looking for credit themselves, and willing to take the rap when something goes wrong, and also explaining to people clearly what is it that we expect from ourselves today and what is it that society and community expects of us. And going forward, if we want to remain leaders or we want to become leaders in the future, this is what we must do at a minimum. And it has to be a minimum. You're not defining the end goal, because the opportunities are absolutely immense and our potential is enormous.
And are we more resilient than we thought? About ourselves.
Oh, for sure. That's the point. Both, I think Piyush and I started off saying that business, industry, companies, leaderships, management have demonstrated strengths which were not quite apparent. As I say, it's only when you put something under pressure that you see what its true worth is. And in that sense, I think India and industry have stood well,
right.
But it's not over yet. I think we must also know that there is some way to go.
Right. That's an encouraging and a somber note to end on. Mr. Munjal, Piyush Singh, thank you so much for joining us. We were talking about navigating the never normal. I'm sure you've seen some fascinating insights on how to gear your company up, how to gear yourself up as a leader or as a manager. This is part of a series called Accelerating Digital Transformation to Unlock Enterprise, and of course under the larger umbrella of Navigating the Never Normal. Thank you very much for joining us.